Hello everyone. In this episode, we're going to take our CZ75 SP-01 Shadow one and we're going to do some Cajunizing to it. We got a stack of Cajun gunworks parts here. Total cost is just under $100. I also got a new set of aluminum grips. These are cheap. These are off Amazon. This is the Cool Hand brand. Same brand as these G10 ones. These are just aluminum. So we'll see how these work for the money. Here's all the tools I'm going to use to get the job done. Got a set of roll pins here. I got a small ball peen hammer. I got a screwdriver to take the grips off. I got this little plastic tool to help pry parts off that doesn't scratch anything. I got my parts tray here. I use a roll of duct tape to help prop the firearm on to take the pin out here. That's what I'm going to use the hammer for too, with the pins. These lower pins here you can just push out with your roll pins, but to get this out you're going to have to hammer it. I've got my trigger pull weight gauge here. We're going to measure the single action trigger pull and then measure after we install the Cajun Gunworks parts. 3.5 pounds. Should be right on the money at 3.5 pounds each time. So it's pretty good right out of the box. I'm thinking with the upgrades, we're going to be at 3, maybe 2.5 pounds. We'll see. Here's the parts that we're going to change. 11-pound recoil spring, all metal guide rod, 11.5-pound hammer spring or mainspring, whatever you want to call it. Solid steel pin for the trigger return spring. Lower power trigger return spring. Extended firing pin. Also comes with a reduced power firing pin spring. We're going to do it in 2 different parts. The slide first and then the lower. Now since there's no firing pin block, this is simple and quick to do. Merely push down here on the little button and then pull back. And cover it up so make sure that it doesn't come flying out of there. To reinstall the firing pin may take a little bit of practice. There is no notch on this Cajun Gunworks version, so it simply just drops in there. Now I'm going to take my roll pin punch. Now you start and you hold the little back piece on there kind of like this as you push down, and you got to make sure that you keep it flat. So it may take you a few tries, but once you get it started, it'll click into place like so. And then to test, just push down. Need a couple different size roll pins, one for the lower pin, one for the upper pin. One's bigger, one's smaller obviously. So you're going to push down on the lower. There's a little button right here. You need to push, get pressure on this to release the pressure on the pin here. So what I'm going to do is push down on the table real hard, and then I'm going to use the roll pin to push the pin out, and then the pin should pop out. And now I'm going to leave this one in here like such as I take the smaller one and push the top pin out. And you see the magazine spring thing came out. Put your pins in your parts tray, then put it down like this because it is spring loaded. As you pull your roll pin out, part is kind of hard to show, but there's a spring inside the sear cage here that puts tension on the pin that holds the 2 safeties together. So you need to lift that pin up to release the pressure. Then I take my little plastic tool here and it'll pop out one side, and then the pin should come out, and then the other side should be easy to take off. But it is kind of a pain to get that spring out of the way. I use this little screwdriver, but I kind of have to fumble with it. If you have one of those pick tools, it works better, but that's what you have to do. The last step is going to be to knock out the pin that holds the trigger return spring. Now the new solid steel pin will also come with a slave pin. You need to use the slave pin temporarily to hold it in place, and then you use the solid steel pin to drive out the slave pin. So make sure you don't lose that little pin. To reinstall the trigger return spring, you got to take the spring with the long leg facing forward, and the short leg goes down in the space here. So it's kind of hard to show you at the same time while doing it. So the front leg is going to go forward, the long front leg, like so. And then the other piece is going to go down. And then this is where you're going to use the slave pin and connect it with the slave pin to hold it in place while you put it back in, and then drive the metal spring or the metal pin through there. I've got the trigger return spring installed. This is what it should look like with the long leg facing forward, and I've got the slave pin in there. Then when we reinstall it, we're going to use the solid steel pin to drive out the slave pin. Ready to begin the reinstallation. Make sure that the leg is facing forward and that that spring fits into the channel here in the frame right here. Don't want it to get bound up. So you're going to put the trigger in first, and then you're going to kind of bow it in the back to get it to go down. Then you want to make sure that that spring is going to be in the little channel. And now you can put your solid steel pin in, or the solid steel pin installed. You merely line up the holes with the slave pin and the trigger, and then you start to feed the pin through, and then you can use an armored hammer, or I actually use the wooden end of this screwdriver to just gently push the pin through. And now you can put the sear cage in. We're going to reinstall the sear cage. So this is the way that it orients in here. You're going to put it down in here and you're going to push down because you want the holes to line up for the manual safety. And remember, we have to take that little spring here, and we're going to have to take it and put it on the little notch here to give it tension. You want to make sure that you pay attention that there is a detente spring here on this side, and then there's a little piece of plastic. It's all black, you can't see it, but it basically is underneath the rail here on that side. You don't want to lose either one of those, or else you won't be able to have tension on your manual safeties. Got the sear cage reinstalled, can function test it. Got to make sure that when you feed this side on, then you lift up the spring to get it to push forward. You got to push the little detente that's in here backwards a little bit, and then push the final little bit in, or else you won't have any tension on the safeties. Now you can put the hammer spring back in with the little guide, and then put the new grips on, and we're done. Two and a half pounds. Two and a half pounds. So with those parts changes that we made from Cajun Gun Works, we knocked a pound off the single action trigger pull. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.